Hello, my dear students. Today we will start with a new concept trade. So, what is trade? Trade denote buying and selling of goods and services. Trade facilitates transfer of ownership and possession of goods and services from seller to buyer. That means, in general terms, if buying and selling of goods and services is done, then it can be treated as trade. Clear? Then it can be exchange of goods and services with money or money's worth. In this, the ownership and possession of goods and services transfer from seller to buyer. That means if seller is selling goods to buyer, then ultimately seller was first the owner of the goods, then ultimately he sell goods to the buyer, then afterwards buyer will become the owner of the goods. So trade is nothing but buying and selling of goods and services is known as trade. Then trade is further classified as you can see in this picture, trade is classified into two parts. Home trade, it is also called as internal trade as well as domestic trade, and other is foreign trade, it can be called as external trade or international trade. Then again, home trade is divided into two parts, wholesale trade and retail trade, and foreign trade is divided into import, export and import. Then further, my dear students, we will learn first home trade. As I told you, home trade is also known as internal trade and domestic trade. So what is home trade? Home trade is nothing but when the trade is conducted between within the geographical boundaries of a country, right? When, for example, if Kerala is doing or buying or selling goods to Delhi, then ultimately these two states come under India within the political boundaries, right? Within the political boundaries, geographical boundaries of a country. Then this trade can be termed as home trade. And remember that home trade is always conducted with local currency. As you all know that in Kerala, we are using rupees, as and also in Delhi we are using rupees. So this will be conducted with local currency. So home trade is nothing but the buying and selling of goods and services which takes place within the geographical boundaries of a country is known as home trade. Then home trade is further divided into wholesale trade and number two is retail trade. Then first we will learn what is wholesale trade. Wholesale means to sell goods relatively in large quantity. Then the wholesalers buy goods and commodities in large quantity from the manufacturer for the purpose of further selling them in small quantities to the retailer. Clear? That means wholesale trade is that trade here. In this, the wholesaler purchases goods in a large quantity. From where the wholesaler purchases goods? From producer, or you can say manufacturer, and after purchasing that goods, the same wholesaler distribute these goods in small quantity to the retailer. That is why he is a link between the producer and the retailer. Clear? The next point is retail trade. What is retail trade? The word retail trade is an adoption of the French word retailer, which means to cut. The retailer cut lumps of goods into smaller portion and sell them to consumer. Thus, retailer divides the bulk into smaller lots and sell them to consumer. Retail trade is a branch of home trade in which goods are sold to final consumer in small quantities. So my dear students, retail trade is nothing but a retailer who purchases from wholesaler. As I told you, wholesaler purchase goods from producer or manufacturer. Same here also, retailer purchases goods from wholesaler, and from purchasing goods from wholesaler, then he supply the same goods to the consumer in a small quantity. That trade is known as retail trade. And retailer is a link between wholesaler or sometimes manufacturer or ultimate consumer. So home trade is classified into two parts, wholesale trade and retail trade. Then Further, my dear students, we'll proceed with the with second point, that is foreign trade. Foreign trade is also known as external trade and international trade. Clear? What is foreign trade? In the words of Robertson, foreign trade is an engine of economic growth. The foreign trade helps a country to utilize its natural resources and to export its surplus production. By proper control of foreign trade, employment, output prices, industrialization, and economic development from abroad. Clear? So, what is foreign trade? Foreign trade is nothing but it is a trade which takes place between two different countries. Clear? It is known as foreign trade. For example, if America is selling technology to India, so that means two countries are there, but these two countries belong to different boundaries. Clear? America and India, and it is outside the political boundaries, so it is known as foreign trade or external trade or international trade. So when boundaries of two different countries are crossed, then different currencies are used. As I told you, in home trade is conducted with a local currency. Clear? I had given you example of Kerala and Delhi, but in this case here two different currencies are there. For example, India, in India we use rupee, and what about America? In America we are using dollars. So ultimately there are two different currency. Then it is further divided into three categories. Number one, import trade, export trade, entrepot trade. First we will discuss import, the act of bringing in a good or service from a foreign country. That means whenever we are importing goods from other country, right, that is known as import trade. For example, India is purchasing machinery from America. That means from America the technology is coming inside in our country, so this can be treated as import trade. The next is export trade. Exports can be defined as sale of goods and services from one country to another country. For example, India, right, we have India is a large producer of mangoes, right? So when India is exporting mangoes to America, that means India sell goods to America. That means again two different countries are there. So this can be called as export trade. The next is entrepot trade. What is entrepot trade? Entrepot trade means a facility to import manufactured or unmanufactured goods from one party of other country on free of custom duty and other levies for re-export to a third party of another country after simple processing, that means repacking, relabeling with a value addition. Clear? That means entrepot is a combination of import and export trade. It involves importing the goods from one country and reselling these goods to another country. I can give you an example. Indian seller, that means if Indian seller import goods from Japan, right? If India is importing goods from Japan and India is doing repacking or manufacturing, uh, then the same goods is being re-export to Africa. That is known as entrepot trade. So my dear students, we have learned today the concept trade. Trade is nothing but buying and selling of goods with money or money's worth is known as trade. Here exchange of goods takes place and the ownership is transferred from seller to buyer. Then trade is classified into two parts, home trade and foreign trade. Again, home trade is further classified as wholesale trade and retail trade, and foreign trade is divided into three parts, import, export and entrepot. Thank you, my dear students.